For 30 years, Audrey Meadows remained silent. During interviews, she had a smile on her face. In front of everyone, she thanked Jackie Gleason. She safeguarded the honeymooners' enchantment. However, she did manage to expose Gleason in 1994, which was 2 years prior to her death. One man's refusal to rehearse was the source of the laughter. Whose moods caused everyone to tiptoe, and who went mute for days. No one had anticipated the darker side of reality regarding the most beloved pair in television history. On February 8, 1922, Audrey Meadows came into this world in Wuchang, China, a city far from Hollywood. Missionaries from the United States were her parents. Audrey, the fourth youngest kid, arrived after more than a decade in China. The sounds of revolution, political upheaval, and a society unlike anything they had ever encountered in the United States reverberated about their home. Throughout the 1920s, the area around Wuchang remained turbulent, having been a flashpoint during the revolution that deposed the Qing dynasty in 1911. That is the place where Audrey first formed her recollections. During her first 5 years of life, she did not speak English despite playing among Chinese children and listening to Chinese music. In 1927, she made her way back to the USA. Her father took a position as a cathedral rector after the family moved to Rhode Island. All of a sudden, there she was, a small kid, frozen in a New England city, utterly oblivious to the language spoken all around her. American English was not her first language. However, her native tongue remained intact. Audrey was a native Mandarin speaker. It broadened her perspective and made her more aware of things than most Americans. The capacity to change with the times became ingrained in her character. However, it was never easy being at home. Jane Meadows, Audrey's older sister, had started her career in the entertainment industry. She embodied all that was glamorous and theatrical about her ascent to Hollywood stardom. After signing with MGM in 1944, she began appearing alongside movie greats in no time. In the meantime, Audrey began with music. She had a unique voice and the ability to soar like a bird. However, Jane cast a long shadow over her. It hurt to hear the parallels. The competition was noted. Following Audrey's marriage to airline businessman Robert Six, there were instances when the sisters remained silent. That didn't sit well with Jane. They became less close as time went by. They re-established their bond following Six passing in 1986. No amount of notoriety could break the bond they had. It was her voice that launched Audrey into stardom. She made her Carnegie Hall debut as a coloratura soprano when she was only 16 years old. Even though that platform was reserved for legends, Audrey more than held her own. She went on to star in musicals such as Anything Goes and Roberta with opera companies in Chicago, Louisville, and Detroit. However, her sister Jane was the one who first suggested that she try acting. When it came to Audrey, Jane noticed something no one else had. A captivating personality, impeccable comic timing, and the ability to light up any room. Audrey gambled. After trying out for the musical Top Banana, she was cast in a pivotal part opposite Phil Silvers. It shifted the entire dynamic. Playing at the Winter Garden Theater from November 1, 1951, to October 4, 1952, it was a smash hit. 350 shows. She played Betty Dillon, a part that required impeccable timing and unwavering energy, night after night with Phil Silvers. The show was quick-witted and made fun of the industry shit that is television. She needed to be absolutely precise when singing, dancing, and delivering punchlines. Collaborating with an organization as large as Silvers was no picnic. Always on the go, he made a lot of noise. Yet Audrey continued. She picked up the cues on when to keep silent and when to make a joke. She dubbed it her comedic boot camp afterward. She learned to adapt to his improvising and match his speed night after night. Under that strain, her self-assurance grew. She learned to maintain her composure in the face of intense pressure. Proof, something that very few young actresses ever have, was hers by the run's end. Assurance that she could withstand the limelight. As evidence that she could manage the challenges of performing in a live theater setting. That was significant because the advent of television was going to alter the course of history. Turning her attention from stage to screen, Audrey followed Top Banana. She began her NBC career in 1951 as a guest on Bob and Ray. There were a lot of ridiculous sketches, phony news, and wild parodies packed into the 15 minutes that the show was on. It was just what she needed, fast, spontaneous, and wild. Audrey did more than sing. She portrayed several roles. She was a famous soap opera star once. She went from being completely serious one second to the next, presenting a phony weather report. Minimal time was allotted for rehearsal. There was no slacking off. Despite the lack of a safety net, she managed to survive. In the face of adversity, she mastered the art of role switching and learned to persevere. Her signature became that lightning-fast thinking. Jackie Gleason took notice of her at this period. At first, he felt she lacked the raw, unabashed charisma of Alice Cramden because she was too beautiful and well-groomed. Her timing, composure, and ability to hold the scene even in the midst of pandemonium caused him to reconsider. She was given an opportunity by this small comedy program. With a firm grip, she refused to release it. To be sure, it wasn't easy. Audrey, in the days before television cameras and Broadway, was just another young lady attempting to break into the New York entertainment industry. The rehearsal club was her home. It was a little brownstone on 53rd Street. It was partially financed by John D. Rockefeller Jr. Cozy quarters for dozens of women, 5 to a room, with a single restroom and a closet that was overflowing. Rent was $40 per week and that included food. A sense of privacy was non-existent. Notoriety failed as well. The common goal was being pursued by all. She lived with some people who would later become famous. This film stars Lucille Ball, Katharine Hepburn, and Ginger Rogers. Some disappeared within the city. Vanished without a trace. To get by, Audrey took odd jobs and saved up what little she could. At times, the club would host performances in order to entice agents. For the sake of appearances, she occasionally sported borrowed clothing. Joy, sadness, and a continuous stream of rejections were all part of it. However, she discovered the perseverance she would require in the future within that packed brownstone. The bravery to proceed. The fortitude to smile despite taking a hit. Audrey Meadows was given no opportunity to speak when she initially entered the room to try out for the Honeymooners. Jackie Gleason shot her down after glancing at her. He remarked that she was overly beautiful, polished, and fashionable to portray Alice Cramden. Alice, in his view, lacked grace. Rough, weary, and razor-sharp, she was her usual self. Not Meadows. Instead of a crowded Brooklyn kitchen, he saw a woman who appeared more at home in a cocktail lounge. Years of experience were already at Meadows' disposal. She exuded self-assurance and had Broadway credits to her name. At that very second, though, it was irrelevant. Gleason was blinded by her appearance. Alice, in his mind, was a tough, life-hardened woman, not the kind to flaunt her celebrity status. Because of that hasty decision, she almost lost one of the most memorable performances in television history. It didn't make Audrey cry, though. Moving forward, she began to work. She undressed the following morning, taking off all of her makeup and accessories. Posing for a portrait that would alter her professional trajectory, she drew her hair back, removed her makeup, and donned an old clothing. It appeared as though she hadn't grinned for a long time. Gleason was sent the photograph by mail. He was so taken aback by her appearance that he failed to recognize the woman he had turned down. He yelled out, "That's Alice," as he slapped his palm down. She nailed the role in an instant. The initial motivation for the role's opening was a mystery at the time. Contrary to what CBS said, Kurt Kelton, the original Alice, did not leave due to sickness. There was a blacklist that included her. Her spouse had participated in a May Day procession. That was sufficient to end their careers during the Red Scare's paranoia. Guilt by association was sufficient, even though Kelton had never cast a ballot. She was no longer listed in the credits. The part that Audrey Meadows took on was one of subdued censorship and political dread. Casting was just the first step. Meadows had to start over from the ground up. Her acting skills were completely at odds with the role. Streetwise, she lacked. She exuded an air of refined composure. Therefore, she began anew. She observed passers-by on the sidewalk. Her speech pattern shifted. She went so far as to alter her manner of walking. She went to great lengths to convince Jackie Gleason that she could trust her. Upon her arrival at the set, she noticed that the woman who had entered weeks earlier was noticeably absent. No one ever doubted her again after she transformed into Alice Cramden. However, entering Gleason's world necessitated stepping into the limelight, and there was no place for second chances in that environment. Jackie Gleason flat out declined to practice. No retakes were allowed. Restarts are not applicable. Only one chance. In front of 15 million spectators. Horror struck Meadows, who had returned from the play. There would be weeks of preparation, she thought. She was instead subjected to just one table read-through before being flooded with lights, cameras, and pressure. The crowd was engulfed in a faux steak that slipped from the dish one night. Keeping the situation alive required her to recover immediately. A safety net did not exist. The actual comedy, according to Gleason, was in the turmoil, not in the exercise. And he refrained from raising his voice in frustration. You were rendered ineffective by his actions. Gleason would avoid talking to you if you made a mistake or irritated him. On neither an hourly nor a daily basis. His demeanor would simply fade. And the room fell hushed as Gleason remained silent. No one dared to speak as the set fell silent. It was like a mental block. Silence, according to Meadows, was much worse than shouting. Neither its duration nor the causes were ever clear. Working through it was all that was required. Gleason was the showrunner extraordinaire. He had to sign off on everything. Dialogue, plot, and shot composition. In his absence, nothing shifted. No line could be changed by the writers. The actors were frozen in place. Even the talented Meadows needed to get someone's okay before she could propose anything. In order to avert his fury, they discreetly practiced in her dressing room. In an effort to avoid provoking him, everyone was precariously balancing. Thus, it was to his liking. The risk factor increased daily. His attitude dictated everything. He was kind and humorous once. One moment he was exploding or completely silent. Various incarnations of him would emerge at different times. Avoiding conflict, Meadows skillfully combined charisma with submissiveness. She had to maintain the audience's laughter without ever surpassing Gleason. Their connection on television was based on the tension they felt in real life. At the end of every episode of The Honeymooners, Jackie Gleason would say something that would make everyone cry. To his TV wife Alice, he would often declare, "You are the best," as he looked at her. A kiss follows as you lean closer. It seemed authentic. It was authentic. Yet, such was not the case. One day, Alice's on-screen actress Audrey Meadows came clean. In reality, Jackie kissed her never once. It was an act every one of those kisses. Leaning in close, he would kiss the air beside her cheek while tilting his head. That was all the camera needed. Even her own family fell for it. The severely cropped pictures were the secret ingredient to the convincing illusion. When Jackie wanted to shield Audrey from view, he'd encircle her in an armful. When he smiled, it would be the perfect expression. Although they never actually touched, the camera captured an angle that gave the impression that they did. Filming took place in the 1950s, a time when television was subject to stringent regulations. The restrictions weren't the only delicate issue here, kissing was too. Dignity was another key issue. Audrey and Jackie were experts in their fields. They were perfectly on target and never breached any personal limits, they just followed the script. A tale involving Audrey's Aunt Christine was once recounted. According to her aunt, who saw an episode, Mr. Gleason might be harboring feelings of infatuation on her based on his passionate kisses. Smiling, Audrey had to deliver the bad news. She claimed that he doesn't actually kiss her. It appears that way. Reruns weren't even on anyone's radar in Hollywood in the early 1950s. There was no television yet. Nobody even considered the possibility that long-gone programs could generate revenue again. However, a hidden weapon belonged to Audrey Meadows. Uncle Edward, who was her brother, wasn't a performer. A lawyer, he was. Edward also did something no one had considered when Audrey earned the role of Alice Cramden on The Honeymooners. He amended her contract by adding a line. According to that phrase, Audrey would receive payment if the show were to air again. Nobody else in the cast had something like it that time. Not even the show's star, Jackie Gleason. Reruns of the original 39 episodes had no effect on anybody else. It seemed like Audrey was consistently receiving her paycheck. Reruns of those shows have shown on American television, cable, and even foreign television networks many times over the years. Each time, a new check came in the mail. This wasn't about making a little more money. Suddenly, it was in the millions. Audrey used to make around $2,000 weekly when she was filming the show. Even while it was substantial in the 1950s, that sum pales in comparison to what followed. Industry insiders began chatting in the 1980s. They calculated that her earnings from reruns exceeded those from any other part of her career. Additionally, the payments persisted. Even in the 90s, she continued to receive payments. Not everyone on the show was that fortunate, and it was all down to that one astute provision her brother penned. The role of Trixie was vacated by Joyce Randolph. Her contract did not provide residuals. She never got a cut of the show's millions of dollars in syndication profits. She began earning modest compensation years later, when old episodes of variety shows were re-aired. But by that point, the bulk of the profit had already been realized. Joyce discussed it freely. She felt bad that she hadn't gotten better legal counsel. Her narrative served as a subtle cautionary tale for performers worldwide. Get a head start on protecting yourself before it's too late. Audrey, on the other hand, wasn't dependent on a single fortunate deal. She was quite intelligent. Despite the social stigma, she succeeded as a businesswoman during her era. She was a director at Denver's First National Bank for 11 years. She became the first woman to ever occupy that role. Meetings weren't the only thing she did. Decisions were influenced by her. There was no such thing in the 60s and 70s. Moreover, that was not all. In addition, Audrey became an advisory director for Continental Airlines. Instead of doing nothing, she took action while sitting on a board. Flight attendant uniforms were co-designed by her. She was instrumental in designing the airline's lounges and even provided some assistance with the plane's interiors. Because of her, the airline was able to expand. Because of her, famous Hollywood figures took transcontinental flights. The corporation saw a 20% increase in sales after relocating its headquarters to Los Angeles. A TV face wasn't all Audrey was. Behind the scenes, she was a powerful figure. A lot of drama unfolded in her private life. Her first husband was the real estate magnate Randolph Rouse, whom she wed in 1956. The event was officiated by her father, a minister. Their union was short-lived. They separated 2 years after that. Being married to a rising artist was a pressure, but Rouse later said it was enjoyable. Addressing him as Mr. Audrey Meadows was something he disliked. Next up was Continental Airlines president Robert F. Essex. Until his death in 1986, they remained a married couple. A unique form of marriage had taken place. For the sake of his career, Audrey withdrew from acting. In his professional life, she became a fixture. Their homes were in Denver, Colorado, and Beverly Hills, New York. A genuine partnership was formed. She wed twice, each time to men who had very different lives, but she never had children of her own. One characterized by resistance, the other by equilibrium. Audrey was as perceptive even in her personal life. In 1956, on the day of her wedding, she telegraphed Jackie Gleason, "My apologies, Ralph, but I'm starting to believe in bigamists today." Wed to Randy Rouse. Goodbye, Alice. It was a lovely tribute to the marriage they had on TV. Despite this, she remained close to Gleason for years. Nonetheless, her laughter betrayed her agony. Audrey kept silent about her experience working with Gleason for decades. As the cameras rolled, she grinned. Even while she thanked him in interviews, she was hurting on the inside. Though he had amazing moments, Gleason was also tough and nasty. Audrey kept quiet about the burden she was carrying. She didn't start being candid until she was far into her 70s. She was candid in her correspondence, interviews, and statements. She had no resentment. She was really forthright. Genius was Gleason. And he was a bully, too. She remained silent for 30 years. Her personal comfort took a back seat to the show's lasting impact. The honeymooner's enchantment was too precious to her to risk spoiling. Subtlety was her desire. Yet, she was compelled to speak at some point. A new chapter in her story was opened up when she accomplished that. She compared her time spent working with Gleason to balancing on a wire. He was charming for a time. Soon after, he became aloof and icy. His fury erupted out of nowhere. Mistaken word. With just one unflattering glance, the entire ensemble went silent. On edge, everyone drew close to him. Before each try, Meadows had to take a guess at his mood. On occasion, he paid her no mind at all. She maintained her composure even after he publicly scolded her in front of the staff. She brought her A game as Alice Cramden and maintained her composure the whole time. It wasn't simple to be that strong. She was completely exhausted. She never gave in, no matter how much pressure, fear of replacement, or quiet she had to bear. Despite struggling to keep it all in, she became an iconic figure in television history. She refrained from seeking vengeance when she eventually discussed those years. She refrained from making a fuss or insulting him. Without harboring any resentment, she spoke the truth. She gushed about his intelligence. Her other complaint was that he was a pain. She didn't want to bring him down with her candor. The point was to make it clear how much money she lost on the assignment. However, she managed to describe the mayhem with grace and composure. According to her friends, she almost never, even in private, talked ill of him. Her word choice was deliberate. That's the strength of her narrative. She kept it to herself. It was just laid bare by her. The subdued honesty of her words was more powerful than an outspoken charge. She kept mum for decades. It was socially unacceptable for actors to speak out at that era. To maintain the show's reputation, they had to be pleasant and grin the whole time. The network's expectations were high for the newlyweds' appearance. It was her deepest fear that if she voiced her dissatisfaction, either the studio or the audience would reject her. Hence, she persisted. For the sake of herself and everyone watching at home, she maintained silence. Jackie Gleason was near its end in June 1987. He was enveloped in silence, his voice on the verge of disappearing, and his body giving up on him. Stillness. But just then, someone's phone started ringing. The other end of the line was Audrey Meadows. Their friendship remained strong even though they hadn't collaborated for a long time. Marilyn, Gleason's wife, grabbed up the phone before she could even talk to him. Audrey approached Jackie, whispered into his ear as she held the phone to his ear. "You're Alice here." Alice was the name that meant everything. The familiar set and the sound of laughter were revived. As the newlyweds' light, both warm and cold. Their former selves were brought back to life by it. No hesitation on Audrey's part. She conveyed her intended message. "Jackie, I wanted to call and express my love for you." She continued speaking despite the crack in her voice. She expressed her gratitude to him for the role that transformed her life, the part of Alice, and for believing in her. By this point, Jackie Gleason could hardly talk, but the subsequent events broke the spell. "I was well versed in my task." He had an audible, commanding presence. Every home in the United States was rocked by that resonant sound. Eventually, it overcame his frailty to get to her one final time. Meadows would always remember it. According to her, it was crystal clear. It was more than just a recollection of that one sentence. It was the last present. His words were more than just compliments. Even in his final moments, he was assuring her of her significance. June 24, 1987 was just a few days after that when Gleason died. What happened after that last call stunned Meadows, but the ringtone lingered in her heart. A requester made contact. Instead of Audrey, they wanted Alice to pay her respects at his funeral. She was appalled in her character. She said that she had told them she would never step foot in the kitchen dressed as Alice and that she would never go to the moon. An obituary? I think that is the worst thing I have ever heard in my entire life. She refused flatly. To her, Ralph Cramden wasn't dead. He never would be. He belonged to television history now, frozen in time. Audrey chose to attend the funeral quietly, without attention or a performance. That was how she honored Jackie, by protecting the magic they had created together. Years later, she faced her own battle. In 1995, Audrey Meadows was diagnosed with lung cancer, but she didn't tell anyone, not even her sister Jane. She kept the illness hidden, locked away from the public. In January 1996, she was admitted to Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. Just days before her death, the news broke. But by then, the fight was already ending. At 8:50 p.m. on February 3, 1996, she passed away. She was 5 days short of her 74th birthday. Jane later said her sister faced it all with quiet courage. No cameras, no headlines, just dignity. Audrey wanted people to remember her as the woman who brought joy into their homes, not as someone wasting away in a hospital bed. That was the image she left behind. Strong, graceful, unforgettable, but she had one last thing to share before she was gone. In 1994, 2 years before her death, she wrote a memoir called Love, Alice, My Life as a Honeymooner. It wasn't just a book. It was her way of holding on to the truth. The pages told stories from the set, not just the fun moments, but the chaos, the pressure, the brilliance, and the heartbreak. Gleason was a genius, but he was unpredictable. The show was a whirlwind, but in the middle of it all, the cast had a bond that couldn't be broken. She wrote about Art Carney, about Joyce Randolph, about the wild rhythm of live television in the 1950s. She opened up about what it felt like to stand in that kitchen set while millions watched. That book became her voice long after the lights had dimmed. It still speaks today. Audrey Meadows never wanted applause for her pain. She never sought sympathy. She left behind something better, a legacy of honesty, laughter, and deep lasting friendship. And in that final moment with Jackie when he said, "Knew what I was doing," she got her closure. It was simple, powerful, and permanent.